application for approval that will determine the outcome, even though you've had like an identical recipe with just a minor tweak in ingredients or whatever it is, or even in your description. One person might approve it, the other person might not. I've actually resubmitted labels that I've gotten approved just with the different label art. So every word for word, everything was exactly the same as it got approved months ago, and now it's getting rejected for corrections. It becomes a real frustrating process, especially if you're a meader that's creating a lot of new different recipes. I mean, in 2 years, we released 34 or 35 different meads. I have label approvals at least for another 15 already that are going to be coming out over the next few months. So, I mean, we make a habit of always trying to make new stuff while also still repeating a lot of our top sellers and trying to keep those in stock at all times. So we make a ton of mead, but all these new recipes, it's really frustrating to try to get approved, especially when you kind of take into consideration the government wants to control what gets put on the label because they don't want anything on the label to confuse or deceive the consumer. However, a lot of their regulations, at least as far as it comes to mead, tends to be contrary to that. Because on a piment, I can't say that this mead was made from wildflower honey and Cabernet Sauvignon grape juice. I can't say that. I tried to send a label application through with that a year and a half ago or 2 years ago, and it got rejected. And they said, well, you can't specify a grape varietal on the label. So I'm like, all right. So my next iteration was wildflower honey with a popular red wine grape varietal. And then they come back and say, you can't use the word varietal either. And then the final one that got approved was wildflower honey with red grape juice. Might as well have been Welch's.
Yeah.
You know?
God.
Oh man, that's terrible.
So they don't want to deceive the consumer, but yet they're working really hard at you doing just that. Essentially, you know what I mean? So you can't say anything as far as being aged in a distilled spirits barrel, like a bourbon barrel-aged mead, rye whiskey barrel-aged mead, even though I've gotten a label or two approved with that language, but 90% of the time it gets rejected, and there's other meaderies that have gotten approved with it on there. So there's been a lot of talk about that, too.
Yeah.
But there's just zero consistency.
So wait a minute. If you say in the description that the mead was aged in a bourbon barrel or in a whiskey barrel, that's what they go after? They say, no, you can't say that?
Yeah, so as per, so technically mead is treated as a wine federally, so their whole thing in the regulations essentially is a wine product cannot have any mentioning of a distilled spirit anywhere on the label.
Uh-huh.
So you can't say aged in a bourbon barrel, but you could say aged in a barrel. You can't also call a name like, let's say a mixed berry mead aged in a bourbon barrel. You also can't call it something like bourbon berry. No mentioning of any distilled spirit on a wine label.
Okay.
There is a workaround that I have gotten approved, and it starts with the formula application. So we have to submit our recipes and our formulation for each recipe to get approved first before we base a label application, based on the formula, because the two tie together. So there is one really good tip that has worked for me 3 out of 4 times. The 4th time did get rejected, but I'll submit it again, and hopefully somebody else reviews it and approves it. But you basically end up, in the formula, you list your bourbon barrel or whatever other barrel have you as an other ingredient. When you mention it as an other ingredient, because other ingredients under their definition is something that's not fermented, but contributes to the aroma, the flavor, character of the product.
Uh-huh.
So if you're listing it as an other ingredient, then they're going to basically approve it as, let's say, a traditional mead aged in a bourbon barrel. They'll approve that formula as a mead or honey wine with other natural flavors. And then when it comes to your label application, you can elaborate on what those other natural flavors are on the label in your description.
Okay. I bet you a lot of people don't realize just what a pain in the ass the labels are. That came to a surprise to me when I was doing research. How difficult it is to get the labels.
Yeah. People who aren't meaderies don't realize, but people who are meaderies, that's probably the number one topic of conversation.
Yeah, it's gotten a lot better. At least we could call most of what we make actually call it mead now.
Yeah.
Before it was if there was anything other than honey, water, or even with the exception of hops, if there was anything other than that, you could not have the word mead anywhere on the label. At least now we can. So if we make a raspberry mead, we can actually call it a raspberry mead. Before, it would have to be stated as honey raspberry wine. So things have gotten better for sure, and I think TTB's been getting a little bit better, but there's still a ton of inconsistency.
And speaking to that, David Webb sent in a question on Skype, and he says, can you find out who approved a certain label and send all future submissions to that person's attention? Saying that would add some consistency. So it sounds like it's customer service where you call in, you get whoever picks up the phone.
Exactly. Yeah. That's exactly how it is. And sometimes if you know you're in the right, you can call in to their number and hopefully not have to wait more than 20 minutes to get somebody on the phone and kind of state your case. And most of the time that I've done that, and I state my case as long as you're in the right, they'll agree with you and then put a note to the actual person in charge of that application, and then you can get it approved. For the most part, as long as you're in the right and, and coincides with what they're basically tied to be able to and not being able to do. But, so there's always that as well, but yeah, it is tough. It's a struggle, especially when you have a mead that, you want to get everything out and get your label design done and ready so you can send it to the printer and get your labels in time for bottling. It's a lot of coordination. Even more so if you're working with short turnaround times. We're turning around meads in 3 to 4 weeks. With Tasna, you Tasna that crap up. It's happening 3 to 4 weeks at 14%. Might as well start calling my mead Som.
So when you first started kicking meads out commercially, were you using Tasna then, or did that happen later?
No, it happened. It happened shortly after it happened with our second round of batches. In other words, so with our first round of batches, one tidbit of information that most people don't know is the first time I've ever repeated a batch of mead was the first time I filled my tanks at Melovino. I had made amazing mead at home, and I was winning awards left and right in homebrew competitions, including the Mazer Cup.
Yeah,
and
but
I never repeated a recipe. Never repeated a recipe at home. I think the first time I actually ever did a traditional mead was 2 months before I decided to apply for a meadery license. And I said, crap, I better learn how to do a traditional. I hope I can do a traditional mead. And I'm like, all right, let's get some wildflower, let's get some orange blossom, and, whatever. And I applied my techniques. But with our first run of batches at the meadery, for all I knew, all my successes at home were just, one-hit wonders. But, so even with that said, I was definitely paying a lot of attention to everything that was going on with every batch. I'm taking gravity readings twice a day. I'm degassing. I'm doing everything I can, smelling and tasting every single day because I had a lot of money on the line, and for all I knew, maybe I got real lucky with stuff I made at home. And but I was confident enough, obviously, to go ahead and open a brewery and invest the money I did into doing that. But, when it came to, there was one batch in particular that basically stalled out on me. And it got me really frustrated because, and curious at the same time, because the only batch that, one of the only batches that, types of batches that ever stalled on me at home were whenever I used the majority of just orange blossom honey. And And I started looking into it, and I kind of basically discerned, okay, well, orange blossom honey does have a lower pH than most other honeys, and the pH was dropping lower than any other kind of honey that I would use in any other mead recipe, where it's mostly just a traditional mead, whether I'm adding stuff to it in secondary or not. But orange blossom honey always kind of gave me an issue for some reason, and I was using, like the standard cookie cutter, SNA regimen, and every other batch is coming out just fine, even other traditionals with the same exact recipe formulation. And, I dug into it and I saw, all right, pH is dropping way too much just when I use orange blossom honey. So then I started paying attention more to pH. Then I started paying attention to nutrients. Why is it working for these batches and not this one? And so little by little, I just started doing a ton of research. And, I first kind of built the whole Tasna regimen over using Fermate O, because in speaking with Scott Labs and all the benefits of using an organic form of nitrogen versus DAP or Fermate K, an inorganic form of nitrogen, it kind of it was a no-brainer for me to just switch to using Fermate O. And then the question came up, well, how much Fermate O do I just exchange it 1-to-1 as if I was using Fermate K? And so I started doing more research and speaking to people that are smarter than me that know all about this stuff, mainly at Scott Labs. And I based my original Tasna measurements based on the numbers that I got from Ken Schramm's paper, Optimizing Honey Fermentation. And he got those numbers. I forgot the source that he got the numbers for as far as target parts per million of nitrogen for depending on the starting bricks of your must. And I based my first version of Tasna based upon those numbers. And then after like 2 runs of batches, we're talking about like 10 or 12 different recipes. I kind of noticed that, what, I think I might be overfeeding. I don't think I need to compensate that much for the starting bricks. Spoke to Scott Labs again, and they kind of directed me towards what they have specified in their fermentation handbook, the most recent edition. And I basically kind of gave that a shot, and I started playing around with how much nitrogen I add, depending on the bricks. And sure enough, the numbers that they have in the fermentation handbook seem to be basically the sweet spot, which was great because it required less Fermate O. And I now had like a very specific formula for exactly how much to add. And it's very easy, and it was also a very easy alternative method compared to the original Tasna of also tailoring it based upon your yeast strain and its specific nitrogen needs. So with all of that combined, basically, that's how Tasna 2.0 kind of was developed. And ever since I started implementing that at the meadery, it was just like night and day. Every single batch, no matter what the starting pH or starting bricks was, every single batch, pH perfectly buffered, fermentation very strong, very smooth, with no spikes, no sulfur aroma, and fermenting extremely strong even at 62 degrees throughout the entire fermentation. All the way up to 14%, and if we don't cold crash it, it's going to go higher. It's definitely going to go at least to 16 or 17 if we don't cold crash it.
Yeah, once I started using Fermate O, it was there was no going back. It was just so good.
There is a very noticeable difference, and I get 2 emails at least once a week from people thanking me that found a Tasna protocol on meadmaderight.com, and they all kind of have like the same feedback and gratitude because it's been night and day for them as well. They've kind of like experienced the same change in their final outcome of their meads.
Mm-hmm.
It really has made a difference, and I mean, there's 2 camps out there right now with the folks who prefer a simpler, more streamlined approach than the folks who are really jumping on the Tasna bandwagon. So, talk a little bit more about. I mean, because you said Tasna started happening really with that second round, and what variations did you see, and also what pitch to say